Welcome back to our podcast today. And today we have Melissa with us. Thank you for being with us, Melissa.
Thanks for having me.
Melissa, we're living in quite a change era in terms of sales and the interaction between organizations and their customers, whether the customers are other organizations or whether they're consumers. And we've seen the rise of e-commerce. We've seen the rise of self-service and automated tools for people to interact. But is there still that necessity out there for that direct connection between the organization and the customer? And I'm wondering whether customers still need that affinity, or are we moving into an era in which we're just selling commodity products anyway, and that it's all about just the price and the product of the product, and we don't really need this connection between the customer and the organization. What's your perspective out there in terms of the affinity between organizations and customers in this modern computerized era?
The short answer is it depends. If you are selling something, or if your organization is selling something that is somewhat commoditized, like toothpaste or something along those lines, you probably don't need a salesperson or a human interaction. But when you're talking about things that are what I would call considered purchase, so your larger ticket items, for example, business-to-business software, software organizations, software sales organizations selling to large companies to sell things like, financial services type software or marketing automation software. You do still need a salesperson to help guide the conversation. And even though I think a lot of consumers, whether you're purchasing for yourself, a considered purchase as a consumer might be a car, you probably do a lot of research online to find that information and to basically establish what you think you need right out of the gate. The thing is, though, you still kind of need to have that interaction with the salesperson, because there may be things that you haven't thought about that are actually important to your purchase. And I don't think I've seen a lot of articles about, the salesperson is dead and we don't need salespeople anymore. And I think in certain instances, maybe that's the case. But for the most part, if you have a considered purchase item, I think you still need that interaction with a salesperson who knows more about what the product is or the service is than you may as a consumer.
Melissa, if we look at the consumer buying decision process, we can start off with that at the beginning, there's need recognition. And then there's a search, and people typically search their own experiences and memories as a starting point, and then they do external search, maybe on the internet. And then what you're referring to is the next stage, in which the decision criteria process, where they need to understand the decision criteria of the space, how to evaluate those decision criteria, and then come up with the preferred option. There may also be in that process last minute influences. So for example, somebody may have decided that they're going to buy this versus that, and then when they go to a site, they see shipping is free this day, or there's a coupon, and that influences their last minute purchase. And then we get into the purchase and the post purchase behavior. So in that phase in which people need to have a decision criteria, I can understand how the salesperson can help define the decision criteria, help the individual prioritize or rank the decision criteria. And what is the role that you're seeing for online organizations or just organizations selling to customers? How do salespeople still help provide that capability to define the decision criteria and rank them given the specifics of a customer?
So I will say, before I answer your question specifically, salespeople now more than ever are in a really challenging situation because of the internet, because you can do so much research online, because as a consumer, I can go out to my peer networks and say, hey, what did you buy? So a lot of the things that you said that may influence a purchasing decision, I may also go to my LinkedIn peer group or Facebook or Instagram and actually ask folks, hey, I'm thinking about making this purchase. Anybody have any recommendations or suggestions? And I may actually be swayed one way or another because of my peers or my friends or what other folks have purchased. So salespeople are now fighting not just my ability as a consumer to do all that research, they're also having to sell against others' peer groups and the influences that those folks have. So when a consumer actually engages a salesperson, the way a salesperson can set themselves apart is to not be the kind of stereotypical, traditional, used car salesperson type of a thing. Instead, they can actually be a trusted advisor. And because the salesperson knows their product and their service better than anyone else, certainly better than the consumer, they have the opportunity to say, hey, I understand, Ms. Consumer, you're looking for XYZ or you have these needs, but have you also thought about the impact that this will have on your business down the line? And have you thought about these other things that could impact your business down the line or could impact what you're looking at down the line? And the salesperson, the really good salespeople I've seen, set themselves apart that way by actually questioning what the consumer or what the buyer is looking for and actually guiding them down a path that provides them with a really great customer experience instead of just trying to sell them something as quickly as possible.
So I hear a couple of takeaways based on what you're saying, Melissa, is that customers are now more knowledgeable about the options and maybe about the decision criteria that they have, and salespeople are more focused on providing that long-term solution to the customer as opposed to just selling them a product. But I found really interesting when you were talking about that one of the roles for the salespeople is to challenge the perceptions that the customer has. And certainly on a personal side, I've had that as well. I go in and I think I want this or that. And by discussing with the salesperson, I find out that, no, that isn't the best option. I had that a while back. I went into a store looking for a door. I found a real cool exterior door. And the salesperson said, yeah, well, you don't want to buy that because, and that changed my thinking. So I hear what this solution approach, and you also refer to agility with salespeople in the sales processes. Can maybe you speak a little bit more about how agility fits into the sales process?
Yeah, I look at the concept of agility in the sales process very, very similar to improv. So any improv company or the improv process is this ability to listen to understand and actually actively listen so that you can adapt based on what your improv troupe is doing around you. So if anyone has seen improv, you sort of start in one space, and based on what's happening around you or based on what the audience gives you, you actually change and modify based on your surroundings. And that really requires you to actively listen, and instead of listening to just speak, you actually listen to understand and adapt and be agile based on the situation around you. And the really good salespeople that I've seen and that I've worked with are the ones that adapt and listen and seek to understand versus seek to speak and just regurgitate whatever sales process pieces or whatever messaging they were taught to spit up, as an example. The ones that actually listen and are agile in that moment and adapt based on what the customer is saying to them, those are the ones that are really successful, because then they can truly guide the customer on a journey versus, again, trying to sell them something.
You know, when you were talking about the process there, I imagine even when the salesperson is doing the improv, they're still adhering or aligning with a process. And if we're looking at a process in which there are these speaking points and stages and phases along the way, that sounds very linear and sequential. Do this, say these following things, it leads to this. But it sounds as if you're talking much more of a multi-dimensional sales process in which there are many different directions that the salesperson can go in. So even though they're improving, they're still following the network of stages, but more decision points along those stages. They can go in this direction, that direction. They can mention this, they can mention something else, bring out this data, bring out that data, all based on what the customer is saying. Am I understanding correctly that what you're advocating is more of a multi-dimensional kind of sales process with many different decision points, and the salesperson is understanding the customer and therefore navigating through this space?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. The sales process is absolutely not linear, as you mentioned. The good thing about the sales process is that it gives you guidelines, right? It gives you a sense of, here are the rough stages that I need to move my deal along in order to ultimately get a customer to purchase from me, or not purchase from me, but these are the steps that I need to take. And here's some activities, and here's some of the things that the customer's thinking about, and here are some of the things that you have at your disposal. But no customer is the same. And a process is great because it gives you some guidelines, but with a good solid process in place, it allows you then to have that agility and that sort of improbability, because you've got your sort of foundational guideposts that allow you to kind of go into different dimensions based on kind of the rough path that's ahead of you. Because no customer is the same. You may have customers that kind of are similar and look like one another in their buying ability and everything, but how they go about purchasing may be entirely different. So you have to have the rough foundation, the rough process in place to give you at least some guide, but then also have that ability to improv off of that.
Melissa, how do we use metrics around this? Because in the old sales funnel approach, we would have the customers coming in, cold calls perhaps, and then we would funnel them through different processes, and there would be a ratio of customers to each stage in the process. And we could say the sales process would take maybe a month or 2 months or whatever. And therefore, that was really useful in predicting sales down the road. If we had 50 customers in this stage, we would know we'd have so many in the next stage, and therefore it would be predictive. If we're using more of a sophisticated guidelines approach with rough stages, do the metrics still stay the same, or are we seeing a change in sales metrics?
I'd say that the metrics haven't changed that much, because no matter what, you have to have a certain amount of velocity through your sales funnel, and you have to have a certain amount of prospective customers entering into your sales process in order to have a certain amount of closed business that you project by the end of the process. And as people move through those stages, having those conversion metrics at each one of those stages is good in order for you to sort of assess as an organization, do I have a healthy pipeline of people flowing through my process? Do I have my salespeople doing the right things at each of these rough stages to move people along? Are people getting stuck at any stage because the salespeople aren't doing the right thing? So it allows you to still look at those same metrics, but recognizing that every stage there are sort of rough things that a salesperson should be doing. If you do have deals sort of sticking or people just not responding anymore to the salesperson, you can at least then know at that stage, you can hone in on that stage and go, okay, what's happening here? And the great thing is there's lots of technology out there that allows you to analyze calls and take a look at the velocity through the funnel and analyze all of the stages and use AI to see what's happening at each of these stages of the process, so that the technology now allows you to have a little bit more of a multi-dimensional view into your sales process versus straight up conversion metrics stage to stage.
Melissa, when you talk about technology and much more of a multi-dimensional space, I'm kind of wondering whether it's also possible to bring in other sales metrics. For example, a customer who may not buy today may come back another day, perhaps if the product that they bought didn't work, or if there another issue comes up for them. And customers that we're talking to today may also influence their friends to come to our organization. I'm wondering whether, with the analytics now and the potential to take a look at what's happening on social media, whether you would also incorporate these larger potentials.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, customers, just because a customer is interacting with the salesperson doesn't necessarily mean they're ready to buy right now, but they could come back at some point. They could come back in the future. They could refer someone. Someone can come to you because they heard about you through some event or through social media, etc. So all of those are critical to track in the process, because then it gives you a good sense, either a sales organization or a marketing organization, a good sense of where's all my interest coming in from, and how can I adapt my communication based on where folks are coming in from.
Absolutely. And I'm wondering how we could track that, because not all of that conversation would take place on social media. Some of it would take place customer to customer. Some of it we may see on social media. So if we're tracking that, I'm thinking in terms of some of the metrics, which would be more action-based, more in terms of how did this customer hear of us? Is that also something that a modern salesperson should be looking at?
Oh, absolutely. And the good news is there's a lot of customer relationship management, Salesforce automation platforms out there that you can start to integrate things like social media into that, and even if it's customer to customer, if the salesperson's on a call and that customer says, "Hey, I heard about you through this customer," they can track all of that through the automation system. So it's even though the internet and technology has removed a lot of the research steps away from the salesperson and given it to the hands of the buyer, a lot of the how people come into you and the marketing side of it, and how a salesperson can then adapt, there's a lot of technology that's caught up there as well. So it's interesting how technology has offset one part of the salesperson's job, but then also augmented another part of their job.
Can you give us a sense of some of the sales intelligence that you're getting out of these other kinds of metrics and channels? Is there, with the modern tools there, what kind of results are you seeing in the references between people and other influences? Can you give us some example of the results there?
Sure. So I've seen one really great one is call recordings. So you can actually, there's a lot of really great call recording softwares out there. When your salesperson is on the phone with a customer, you can actually, the software pulls out keywords that the salesperson or the buyer has said, and you can start to do reporting on that. So if a customer has mentioned another customer, or mentioned a social media outlet, or mentioned a particular campaign, the AI behind those software is actually searching through those words, and you can pull reports on, here are the more common words that are used here, or even on the flip side, allows you to coach your salesperson. So the salesperson has a tendency to say like a lot, or a lot, or react to a customer in a certain way, or they change their tone, and those things, you can actually get metrics out of that, so that as a sales organization, as a sales leader, as a sales enablement professional, you can start to coach your sales organization on, hey, here's some really great references, or here's some words that you probably shouldn't be using, or here's when your tone changed, or you're talking too much, Miss Salesperson, let the customer talk more. And you can get those metrics out of that kind of technology, which is really neat, because that's something that's changed over the course of the last couple of years.
Very cool. Melissa, as we come to the end of our podcast, do you have any takeaways for our listeners?
Yeah, I'd say one major takeaway is the role of the salesperson is still as important as it was before technology, before the internet, but how you represent yourself as a salesperson has to change. You can't, you're fighting the perception of the sort of slimy used car salesperson. The way you get out of that is to think about the customer and think about why they are coming to you, and adapt and be agile to what they're looking for and their needs, and challenge them on things. The way I like to talk to folks is, as a salesperson, are you a bartender or are you a personal trainer? And the most successful salespeople out there are personal trainers to their customers. They push them, they challenge them, but at the end of the day, they feel better. The customer feels better for the interaction versus the bartender. You get lots of drinks and you don't necessarily feel so good the next day. So my takeaway is, be the personal trainer for your customers.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.